All right. And with that, I will hand it over to Rebecca.
Good morning again, everyone. This is our May 2023 meeting of the Agriculture and Forestry Carbon Capture and Sequestration Advisory Panel. It's great to see you all, and I know there are signs of spring, at least here in Western Washington, that are very encouraging, hopefully also where you are. And time passes. And in fact, it's almost been a year since the initial inaugural convening of the advisory panel was held. And it'll be part of thinking about the last year is really the focus of our meeting today. So just to get started with who we have here from ecology today, we have the whole gang. Joel popped on and he may need to pop off, but he's here at least for the outset. So glad to have Joel with us. And for the agenda today, we have a couple, we'll start with a breakout, we'll start with our opening and welcome, and we'll shift into a brief update from Abby on ecology happenings with the Clean Fuel Standard. Then we'll shift into looking back at the year, and I'll provide an overview of some of the key notable activities that the panel has been part of and some of the products out of that. And then we'll have some breakouts on a couple different kinds of learning. So the first breakout will be on like the topics and focus of the panel. And then the second breakout will be really on the panel itself and the formation of the panel and the activities of the panel. And then we'll briefly discuss what's coming up next. And I think one thing I would like to help us in thinking about our time together this morning is it's not capturing all of the learnings at this one point in time. I'm thinking of this as a kickoff so that we can start in a group setting to think about what are some of our key takeaways related to the activities and the panel itself. Then we're going to have some follow-on ways to capture some of those reflections and learnings. So this isn't the end-all be-all here. This is really a kickoff to get us thinking about the past year. So more on that to come. But first, I'd like to ask Abby to, actually, if we can, pardon me, I would actually like to start with a round robin warm-up. And this was in the email, so hopefully you've had a moment to prepare for this, but essentially we're going to go in a round robin and share a particular resource or a legislative update or some type of technology development, something that's of interest to the business of the panel. So it can be pretty broad here and what might be of interest. So that's what our round robin will be. And if you have, you can also put things into the chat as you go around, and I can give an example of that with what I'll share. So that'll get us going and thinking about resources. And great, thank you, Karen. I know Karen might need to jump off, so she shared an update, so that's wonderful. So I can start us off, and then I would like to have Erin go next, and welcome to Erin from Commerce, who is our newest panel member. And perhaps, Erin, when it comes to you, before sharing the resource or news bit or sharing your item with the panel, if you could give a brief introduction to yourself, that would be really great. And then we'll just do the popcorn style where you can look for somebody who hasn't gone yet. And I will say Janae she'll be doing tech backend hosting, so we won't include her in the popcorn go round. So we can include anybody else. And any questions on that before we kick off on that? Okay. Well, I will share I love to listen to podcasts. I drive down twice a week to Lacey from Bellevue as part of my commute to ecology, and it's really great to be able to listen to podcasts. And I listened to a recent podcast that talked about biofuels and the history from 2007 around EPA rulemaking and updates that are coming. And that was helpful for me to understand some of the background of what is happening right now. So I will share that, and I'll share that in the chat. So if you too are interested in some of the background, and I'm not going to endorse their recommendations and know that they have a particular perspective, but I thought it was useful. All right, Aaron, on to you.
Okay. Hello. Okay, good. My name is Aaron Peterson. I work for the Department of Commerce. I'm based in Ellensburg. I'm in the energy division. I've been with the department since June of 2022. My title and focus is on the agricultural and rural energy policies of the state. Particularly, I'm watching this morning, the governor is going to be signing siting and permitting bill that will be more than just clean energy projects, also industrial clean tech, if you will, projects and businesses expanding in the state, hopefully, coordinated permitting and the like. So I'm watching that. Yeah, I've just joined this group. First, I guess, meeting, observe the biochar one. And on the note, I'm trying to learn more about and the desire to gather up the forest biomass that seems to be aplenty, and the fire hazards surrounding it, and who, where, what, how are we going to treat, and some will make money off of that biomass.
Great, thanks, Aaron. And if you want to select somebody else to go next, that would be great.
I muted, sorry. I'm going down the participant list. Let's go Abby Brown.
Sure, thanks so much, Aaron, and welcome. I also have a legislative update that is very exciting. So Ecology has been working on a sustainable aviation fuel bill, and the governor is going to be signing it this morning, actually during this meeting in about 20 minutes. So this is a bill that will incentivize in-state sustainable aviation fuel production and adjust the clean fuel standard to allow for this to happen more quickly than it would have otherwise, and also create some mechanisms within the Washington State Department of Revenue to provide a tax credit for in-state production. So this is something that Ecology has been working on throughout the legislative session, and we are excited to be able to be, taking a step to decarbonize the aviation sector, which is a difficult to decarbonize sector, and also that a lot of this will be kind of kicking off in hopefully an in-state industry for producing such fuel. So it will be interesting. There are already some discussions about kind of the new and innovative fuels that might be used, and I think we are hoping to get creative about how that fuel is produced. So I will, let's see, how about, I'll hand it off to Max.
Hi all. If we've got some new folks, Max Dubison here, Indigo Ag. I lead our sustainability policy and engagement team, and we're focused on row crop agriculture for the most part, but agriculture just more generally, and helping farmers adopt sustainable practices and monetize that. So one way of doing that is through biofuels. And it's an area we've been working on a lot over the past year. I was bummed to not be able to attend the biochar meeting last time. Biochar is another thing that we're doing a lot of field trials on and understanding when we can start to incorporate that into our carbon projects. I think, something that's a topic of interest for us and something that we're working on a lot that's related to biofuels is how do we make sure that these incentives work out for farmers over time, over crop rotation specifically. So if a grower is just selling corn to make ethanol, what do they do next year when they're growing soy? And so we've been working to pull carbon programs and, sustainable sourcing programs like biofuels together in a way that we can stay with the farmer every year, and maybe they sell their grain in different ways, and figure out the best thing to do with that carbon intensity.
Thanks, Max. And
Uh,
who would you choose?
I'm gonna go right in the middle of the Brady Bunch screen over here to Paul.
Hi, all. Paul Buckland. I'm the Forest Resource Manager for Inland Empire Paper Company. You'll notice I'm wearing a sling. I just got out of his first day back from surgery last week, and so I'm still weaning myself off of pain meds. So I'm a little foggy. Just saying. So if I can't think of a word, just excuse me. A recent I saw a presentation on carbon sequestration rates over different forest owner types, fed, state, private, non-industrial. The takeaway I got from that was working forests had higher sequestration rates, mostly due to lower mortality rates and higher storage rates because of the production of log products. Ganguly with UW, who I'm not sure if that's published data yet or published yet, but I got a little preview of it. It was very, very interesting. That's all I got.
Thanks, Paul. And yeah,
I'll pick someone. How about Danny?
Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Gilardi. I am the Senior Soil Scientist and Climate Coordinator at the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And I think everyone knows it's been a very exciting legislative session for agriculture and climate. It seems to me like the first real policy moment that recognizes that agriculture is both impacted by and impacts climate. So at the department, we have a lot of new projects, both, I think someone else mentioned the Clean Energy Siting Bill. We'll be on that. Also updating the State Integrated Climate Response Plan. We got a new program funded for, it's something like a certified organic, but it's specific to conservation practices and helping farmers promote the different soil management and cover cropping, reduced tilling, those different practices. And that's a national program. It started in Illinois, it's now in Colorado, and through the Climate Smart Commodities grant is in 11 states. So some of your stakeholders may be excited about that. It's a way to kind of brag about practices and generate additional revenue through that. And there are more, but I'll stop there. Very exciting time. Oh, and let's go with John Henriksen.
Yeah, hi there, John Henriksen. I'm a small forest landowner, also a member of the Washington Farm Forestry Association, and I'm helping coordinate the carbon work group that is getting deep into a lot of this. Paul just mentioned some of the figures that we're coming up with, and also I guess the thing I wanted to feature was we have we're working with the University of Washington Natural Resource Spatial Information Group, the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences, to develop the mechanism of remote sensing for all of the needs related to measuring carbon before and after, over time, the consequences of harvesting, the consequences of different practices in terms of intensive management versus non-management, so that we can really quickly quantify what's happening on the landscape at a very detailed level. So this would be a big game changer. There's already elements out there in the market, but this is kind of more detailed and hopefully more accurate, so that when it comes to quantifying credits and any measurement on the landscape, we can rely on remote sensing, and probably in the future, AI will be a big part of that. So that's what's happening. One of the elements of the carbon work group that's pretty exciting, and I'll pass it along to Jim Hamonette.
Well, thank you, John. I guess what I would bring, I'm with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and Washington State University. You've heard me talk before about biochar to this panel. Basically, I work on life cycle assessment side of it, in addition to just having a general knowledge of what it's about and what it can do. I guess what I would bring is I'm knee deep in lab work the last couple of weeks here, actually the last month, working on ways to capture some of the CO2 and energy that's released during biochar or bioenergy production, and find further ways to capture it as opposed to just letting it go back in the atmosphere right away. So as you know, at least about half of the carbon in the biomass goes into the atmosphere right away when you make biochar. And what we're trying to do is see if we can do something to capture some of that. And what we're looking at is weathering of rocks. Basically, you've heard of enhanced weathering, probably is another carbon drawdown technology. And we're looking at enhancing that rate even further by using the waste heat from the biochar production and combining it with, say, crushed basalt as a source of calcium and magnesium, which precipitates the carbonates and pulls out the CO2 that way, which is nature's way of pulling CO2 out of the air. And so we're just exploring the feasibility of that right now on actually a Washington Department of Commerce project. And we know it can be done technically. The question is whether it's economical or not, and that's really the focus of this work. We'll know probably in another, well, the project's over in the end of June, so we'll know by then whether this is something that has economic legs at the moment or whether it's something that needs to wait for a higher price of carbon. And I think that's all I'll say there. I'll pass it on to Drew.
Thanks, Jim. So my name is Drew Jones. I'm a research forester at the Pacific Northwest Research Station, part of the Forest Service. And I'm working on a carbon science synthesis, which is trying to collect all carbon dynamics literature, data that I can find for Alaska, British Columbia, Oregon, Washington, California, and Hawaii. So a very large geographic range. And what I'm working on or finishing up right now is a manuscript designed to improve our baseline estimates of soil organic carbon using multiple models. I've combined them and created an ensemble model to predict soil organic carbon at various depths. So look forward to that in the next couple of months or something, getting that out there. But that's my update. There's a lot more down the pipeline, but I'll try to keep it short.
Thanks,
And I'll
Drew.
go and call on Harrison.
All right, thanks very much. As you all might not remember, but I'm the Chief Development Officer for a company called Pacific Ag. We are at our core an agricultural operations company. So we're North America's largest crop residue harvest and supply company. We operate in or ship to 27 states and 2 Canadian provinces. And what we do is we contract with thousands of growers, farmers across the country. Primarily, these are row crop farmers. We come in with our equipment after the grain has been harvested. So imagine a cornfield. The combine comes in and takes the grain, and we come in behind them and take between 30 and 50% of the above ground biomass, again, depending upon the farmer's choice. It's that they're in control of that quantity, and of course the suitability of removing it from that soil type. But so we do that over hundreds of thousands of acres across the U.S. So that's, you know, we're interacting on growers' fields. We're operating our own equipment. We're taking that product, and then we're moving that to downstream customers. Increasingly, of course, those are going to bioconversion processes, and we have forwardly integrated into several businesses, including renewable natural gas. But we had been following the carbon sequestration through farm practices quite a bit, just not actively involved, but looking at it because we're kind of positioned to carry out some of these processes if it made sense. And the challenge that we have seen is just the fragility of just practices, because so the durability of the carbon sequestration, because obviously practices can change back, and so the gains can be lost so easily, and also just the fact that the value of those credits really don't distribute enough value to a grower and to any operations company in order to make it work or to manage the risks associated with it. And because of that, we had been very intrigued. This is kind of piggybacking on Jim's comments about enhanced rock weathering, because this is really an application where you do it once. Of course, it's the powdered basalt, which is leveraging natural processes for sequestering carbon, but it feels like it's more operationally simple. There's certainly more science to be done, but it doesn't really it addresses more of the durability issue, and we think it's very intriguing. And also Washington State, given its climate, its the irrigated acres that are there, as well as the resource of certain kinds of basalt rock, make it potentially a leading area for experimenting with this on scale, though it may be too premature to say that with such authority. But it's an interesting opportunity, I think, for the region, and that's kind of what that's something that we're looking at, or trying to understand better as an operations company. Let's see, and I'm going to go to Zany. If I pronounce it Janie, sorry. Be great.
Let's see. I think we've got. Oh, I will pass for Janae. And let's see. It looks like we have. Yeah, no, that's okay. Looks like we have Sherry, Chris, MC, Chenka, and Karen. I will choose Dr. Chris.
Thanks. I'm Chris Covert-Bowles, a family doc in Seattle with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, or climate health representative on the group. I'll just say, since hearing the biochar talk a couple of sessions ago, and I'm sorry I missed a couple, that just blew my mind. I was amazed at the level of expertise and what a great promising thing that should be. My wife's family comes from a bunch of logging families, so I'm super excited to see, getting the loggers out there in the forest to help the situation and get them some good work. On the health and health side of climate, seeing some of the funding now that we have our clean energy, the big auction that just is starting to generate lots of money to fund all this stuff is super exciting. Connected with farm workers also, and excited to see how to help protect them from the bad air quality of wildfires. And with the Climate Commitment Act, both state and national money really starting to really fund these things in a major way. So pretty excited about all the health improvements that we're going to be seeing with that. And I didn't catch who the other people who haven't yet to speak yet. Can you pick one for me? Sorry.
Sure. How about MC?
All right. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm Mary Catherine McAleer from Weyerhaeuser. And I think I'll also share a legislative and a non-legislative update. As you may know, everybody else, every single other timber lobbyist was busy with Chenka all session working on the DNR carbon issue. I was the only one. Weyerhaeuser did not work on that. And so I was kind of the only one working on the wildfire bill 1578, which we're hoping that the governor will sign soon, but I don't see it on any of the sheets. But it's a relatively large bill, $13.5 million fiscal note, and it's pretty comprehensive around wildfire in the state. We don't have any land in Eastern Washington anymore, but we hate drawing DNR resources to fires on our land, which are happening every year now in Western Washington. They're mostly human caused. I mean, they're always human caused, but of course they get out of control. So I did work on that bill. Happy that it was passed in its form. It actually came out of the legislature unanimously, which is great. So we're hoping the governor will sign that in its current form. But also, non-legislatively, I was at the Olympic Logging Conference last week. My spouse is involved with the organization, so I just go as a +1. But there was a lot of chatter amongst those loggers, even like the really old timers have been doing this their entire life kind of thing about biochar. So I was thrilled to see that. And who is the last one? Chenka, you haven't gone yet, right?
I have not. Yeah, so Chenka Fabrini Chorba, I'm the Deputy Policy Director at DNR. Yes, we were working on a big carbon bill throughout most of session that unfortunately died. But DNR did get a bunch of other funding for kind of exploration of ecosystem services and opportunities for carbon sequestration and storage on our land. So so excited about that. And does that mean I was the last one?
No, we still have Sherry.
Okay, Sherry.
Hi, everyone. Sherry Carney, and I direct forest conservation at Columbia Land Trust. And I guess what I'd like to share is this last year I was appointed to the Washington Conservation Commission, which gives me a unique perspective and an opportunity to see what's happening around the state with agriculture and forestry on all different scales of private landowner application through incentive programs. And I think among the visits this year, an anaerobic biodigester at a dairy farm in Snohomish County in a partnership with the Conservation District and the Tulalip tribe really gave me a perspective of what can be happening on a scale if multiplied. That was very inspiring. Really loved it to see these projects, and we've got continued more funding through the legislature this year to be distributed through conservation districts and the Washington Conservation Commission. So I think I'm excited about that, the private landowner side of participating. At Columbia Land Trust, we're wrapping up our pilot of forest carbon credit program on about 14,000 acres. And that's allowed me, I think, some good perspective from soup to nuts on that pilot and in the ACR voluntary market. I think we're going to go back and do another round this next couple of years, but I'd say those are perspectives. Natural climate solutions is an area of real interest for me, of course, and so those are some things that I would say this year has brought for me. And I don't know who's left, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. I actually think we do have Karen. I know she did message me saying that she needed to step away. So Karen, I'm not sure if you're on right now.
I literally just walked back in the door.
Oh, perfect timing. I did put in the chat your update, but if you want to share about your news.
Yeah, so the U.S. Canola Association and PNW Canola Association and everybody related to canola has been trying to get canola approved as a feedstock for renewable and biodiesel for over 2 years. And the EPA finally did do that recently. So that was a huge win, so to speak. And on the LCA front, I did not have time to prepare for this particular comment, but we are also working on LCA for winter canola because there's going to be more of a push for that, specifically in the Southeast United States, where they can double crop winter canola with other crops down there. So you're getting 2 to 3 times the yield, quote, oil yield, if you've got soybeans and canola in rotation, for example, as you would with just a single crop year. So that's all I have for right now, Rebecca.
That's great. Thanks, Karen.
Yep.
Thank you everyone for all the updates, and it's really clear that just everything that this panel is exposed to, it is really it's great to hear from you all. And I know we're a little over time, but actually I think this is a really worthwhile use of our time just to hear the scope of things that are happening and that our panelists have insight into. So thank you so much. Yes, Tebebe?
One thing to share.
Thank you, and sorry about that, Tebebe.
No problem at all. I saw a news on this news. I will drop it as in the chat, but it seems Colorado is using developing credits from biochar. I don't know how they did it, what the mechanism of their evaluation was. For people who are interested to read more, this will be interesting so that we can develop it for our case.
Thank you, Tebebe. Yes, that will be useful to take a look at that. All right. Well, I think what we'll shift now to is an update from Abby on the happenings in the Clean Fuel Standard program at Ecology. Take it away, Abby.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And first of all, it's so interesting to hear the updates from all of you. I have really enjoyed this advisory panel as an opportunity to learn, and kind of the insight that this group is bringing to the table is incredibly interesting. So thank you all for sharing all of that information. Next slide, please, Janae. So we've had a busy few months at Ecology as we close out the first quarter of 2023 and move into the second. We have registered over 250 participants in the program. We're continuing to review and approve registration applications. The first step to joining the program is registering an account in the Washington Fuels Reporting System and/or the Alternative Fuels Portal, which are our IT platforms. Like I said, we've been working to continuously review and approve accounts to get as many people, as many parties registered as quickly as possible. So after a participant has an account, then they register either their fuel supply equipment, for example, which is an FSE, apologies for the acronyms, which could be an EV charger or the equipment that dispenses propane into a vehicle. And they also apply for a fuel pathway. And a fuel pathway is how we determine the carbon intensity for each individual fuel in its production process. So this information has to be reviewed and verified and approved by Ecology. Unfortunately, due to some IT challenges, we had to delay the start date for the first period of quarterly reporting. So reporting for quarter 1 of 2023 just started this past Monday on May 1st. And so the way this process works in the Clean Fuel Standard is that in each current quarter, participants will report on the fuel transactions from the previous quarter. So during quarter 1 of this year, participants were keeping records and tracking fuel transactions. And then in this quarter, they are starting to report that to Ecology. At that point, we will review and verify that information and assign credits or deficits based on what is reported to us. Next slide, please, Janae. So what does this all mean in terms of timeline? Due to the delay, we are also postponing the end date, the deadline by which participants have to submit the report. So previously that was June 30th, which is the end of quarter 2, but we're extending it to July 31st because we had to delay the initial start date by a month. So participants will still have the same amount of time in which to submit their reports. It will just be shifted back a little bit. In the meantime, we do plan to open quarterly reporting for quarter 2 on July 1st as planned. And during this time, Ecology will be, like I mentioned, reviewing reports and issuing credits based on the data that is reported to us. So this is where the program really hits its stride, because as soon as participants have credits in their accounts, they can post them for sale. And that's when we'll see our credit market begin. And because the credit price isn't set by Ecology, it's set by market demand, essentially how many deficits there are in the market as compared to how many credits drives the demand for credits. And parties can negotiate the price among themselves. So this is where we'll start to see a lot more information about the impacts of the program, how much value the credits have, what the credit price will be, things like that. So there is a lot of work happening behind the scenes to make this happen, and to continue getting parties registered and verifying reports. And we've made huge amount of progress in the last few months, but there's also a lot to look forward to on the horizon in terms of what the credit market will look like and what the financial incentive of the program will be. So stay tuned. And with that, I will hand it back to Rebecca.
And briefly, if there are questions or clarifications that people have related to that overview of the beginnings of implementation.
Got a quick question. Abby, is it my understanding then that the end of July is when we'll see actual credit pricing be posted? Is that right? Or there'll be transactions that will have a price associated with them? Is that when we'll see that?
So we are intending to perform excuse me, verification and reconciliation on a rolling basis throughout this coming quarter. So there will be, we will not have to wait until the end of the quarter to see credits.
Okay. And so we'll likely begin to see those being posted like by eco-engineers and others as they do Oregon and California today. Is that?
Yes, that's correct. I think it will take us some time to do some of the initial verification. And I will say that because this is the first time we will be doing this, we want to be thoughtful about how we're doing that verification. So I am not expecting any credit generation in the coming weeks, but I would say before the end of the quarter, certainly.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's of interest. I don't know if it's of interest to talk a little bit about if people do see activity about the price of credits, how to interpret that related to the clean fuel standard in Washington.
Can you give an example, Rebecca?
Yeah, my understanding was that there was a report showing that there was.
Yes, I don't want to get too, this is pretty in the weeds, but essentially OPIS, which tracks various oil pricing, and also they track the allowance cost in the Climate Commitment Act, things like that. They have reported on some futures trading related to the clean fuel standard, which again, I don't really want to spend too much time on that. It gets pretty wonky, but there is some reporting about what the futures, the estimate of the credit price will be. That is not the actual credit price because we haven't issued a single credit yet. It's basically kind of a market analysis of what the credit price is likely to be. So if you see that, that's what that is. But we will be issuing monthly credit transaction reports on our website. So that will be the best way to get solid information on both the amount of credits traded and the price.
Thanks, Abby. All right. So we'll shift gears into the task at hand, which is to really take stock of the year that has already passed, which is amazing. I know that some panel members have been here from the beginning. We also have other panel members where this is their first meeting. And we've had some people who've been able to participate in all meetings, and we've had other people who've been able to join as much as possible, but again, have not, it's been different parts of the meeting portfolio that they've been able to participate in. So I guess as we think about this year, I would again like to invite us to think about this as a kickoff to looking back and trying to capture our learnings and reflections, and that we're going to have more opportunities. So this is not the one point in time where you need to bring out the most salient item to share with the panel, but really is to start us to thinking. So as a way to structure our thinking, and also as a useful product for the panel members, for those who are interested in the work of the panel, what we are envisioning is actually to create a year in review document. And the document will be fairly simple. And Janae, you can go to the next screen, I believe. Yes, you're there. I'm catching up with you. So in terms of the process of reflection, and then also a document that we can refer back to as the panel moves on in time, and also for those who are interested externally, who are interested in the work of the panel, essentially to have a point in time where we've had some work under our belts, where we can provide a snapshot of what the panel has been up to. So that's in a summary. And in this case, this would be something that I would be drafting up. And then today we're going to be talking about those learnings, and as a way to kick off thinking about learning. And actually, can you go to the next slide, Janae? So here's the outline for an actual document, and also just to frame our thinking about the past year. We'll have learnings, and then also working through how we see opportunities for the panel upcoming. And also to collect in one place some of the products that will help us be able to remember our work from the year, and also others. So that's everything from the roster list to the charter that is developed. We have some work plans and summaries of different meetings on different topics. And so that was there is a PDF that is a version of that appendix that was sent out in email on Monday. So I just want to present this idea that that we use this as a structure for our thinking about the year, in having an end document that we can have for our own reference, and to make available on the website. And we can go to the next slide. And just as I'll pause in a moment, but I just wanted to share kind of how I'm thinking about how the development of this year in review document. So today we would just start thinking on this, discussing in small groups and with each other about some of the key takeaways. And again, because we have different experiences, where some people have been, to all the meetings, and some of us have been to one of the meetings, just bring the experience that you had. There's not benefits or detractions from either experience, but just bring that experience. And then after the meeting, we'll have some follow-up to help dig in a bit further after we've started thinking about the last year. We'll have a survey to capture some additional thoughts on learnings. And then also we'd like to schedule post-meeting check-ins with each of you. So this would be probably about 30 minutes with each of you over the next 4 to 6 weeks, to just check in, see how things are going, your recommendations on what's next, and any needs for the panel to be successful. And then from that, Ecology would draft this type of document, and then we would go through a review and response cycle with the panel members to have a final year in review document that will be a tool that we can refer to. I'll pause there. Are there questions or comments or thoughts before moving on? I want to just give that a moment. Okay. So in a few minutes, we will start a structured discussion, breakout discussions on learnings. But I thought first what might be helpful is I had the opportunity, as I was assembling that PDF with all those different documents, to really review the charter, to take a look at the work plans that still are in Mural, and I guess you could say stranded assets in Mural that I have moved to Excel, which I could share with folks if you're interested. But taking a look at those early work plans, what were the thinkings back in May and June of last year about what were the main questions of the panel? And then also looking at the meeting summaries when we discussed what are the different types of carbon capture and sequestration practices that we should be considering, what kind of prioritization around those practices and what kind of criteria might there be. And then also looking through the presentations from Jim and Dominic on biochar. I'm happy to share my takeaways, just having gone through that myself. And I'd say there are a couple things that stand out to me. And actually, if we could go to the next slide. I've given here a summary of essentially thinking about what has been done, what do we still have ongoing, and what are the kind of areas of focus for the panel up in the near term. And so in terms of the things that we have done that were originally on those work plans, we had the charter. There were also questions about, what are the basics of the clean fuel standard? Also, what are the basics of life cycle assessment? And then also just understanding, what are the range of different types of practices that we are talking about. So in those early meetings, we have developed those items through the charter and having presentations on CFS and LCA, and then also spending time on the different types of practices. And we've been diving into biochar. And so we've done an overview with Jim and really been diving deep on the LCA with Dominic. And we have up next really on that practice, controversies and also the economics. What is making sense from an economic standpoint and the different incentives at play, which was also great to hear people talking about that in the round robin. And then in the up next category, we'll talk more about that, but just a sneak peek at what within ecology we're thinking as some near-term up next areas, which would be around wrapping up biochar with documenting learnings, and then also having ecology at this point in time update and refine our thinking on what are the opportunities for clean fuel standard decisions around the focus of the panel, and how the panel can, what opportunities are there for input and recommendation, what kind of needs, and how might it intersect with the work of the clean fuel standard. And we can go to the next slide. I'll also say, coming back, I thought it was very interesting to take a look at those early work plans. And on the left here, I have the main topics. And these were the main topics that were in the mural work plan from June. And I would say what I found heartening is that those that we have been working on these issues and the sub questions that are underneath these topics, and that they've coalesced into more of a structure. And I've essentially, as you can see, we've had this focus on the different types of practices and also the clean fuel standard, and broadly the panel needs to be able to do the job of the panel. And so I found it heartening that those issues that were raised almost a year ago are still relevant, and that we just have a further understanding and concept of how they play, how the panel interacts with those particular questions and topics. Okay, so I think I'll pause there again for comments or questions that folks have on what I just shared. And before we jump into breakout group. Okay. We will now get into the breakout group. So if you, Janae could go to, I think what we have here. Let's see. What we will do, if you can go to the next slide, Janae, we're going to do a modified version of what we did in August. So in August, we did a really very complex version of breakout rooms. This is a modified version, keep it a little simpler. And we'll focus first on learnings. And because this is really the kickoff and to get us started thinking about the last year, we are going to have a moment of individual reflection. This could be a time when you pull up that PDF and maybe scan through it or look at your own notes or take a quiet moment. And again, this is not meant to be the time where you need to succinctly distill the most important takeaways or learnings from the last year, but just to really start the process. And then that will build into a paired discussion, which we'll have for 10 minutes. And the idea being here that each person will have around 5 minutes. And then we'll come to plenary where we'll do a round robin share out. And so this will, as you can tell, this will be really high level, and we're really thinking about key learnings and takeaways. And because of the nature of this being a kickoff and just starting the discussion and our time pressures, it's going to be a really expansive scope for what could be included. So depending on your experience, you might be sharing about the charter or the clean fuel standard learnings or life cycle assessment or any of the practices or specifically biochar. Just really what in your mind, if you were to talk with somebody and say, here's the key learnings that I've had this last year, that's the kind of reflection that we'll be doing here. And are there questions that people have before we break up into groups? Actually, before we go into individual reflection. One thing I'll note, when we do go into paired discussion, we'll have Zoom breakout rooms and they're going to be random. And so I think there's maybe only one guidance I would give, which is Abby and Debebe, if you end up together, if you can come back and we'll figure out how to have you go with other partners. But hearing no questions, if you do have, Janae, maybe you could comment on if there are questions that come up during the breakout room, what would be the best way for people to share questions?
My computer is not unmuting very easily. Yeah, they can use the chat function. They should be able to chat with any one of us hosts and that using that. And if you want, at this point in time, Rebecca, it looks like you will not be in a room, so you could potentially pop in and out if that is something that is helpful as well.
Thanks, Janae. And then I believe also Janae will send out a message when 5 minutes is up, and then also a message at 10 minutes. That's when we're in the paired discussion. Which we won't start with. We'll start with about 3 minutes where you can reflect on the year, and you can turn cameras off for that as well if that's helpful. And we'll go ahead and get started here with the individual reflection portion of the activity. And we'll let you know when there's about a minute left. So let's begin, and we'll be in touch in about 2 minutes to let you know that there's 1 minute left. Thank you. We have about 1 minute. Okay, if you can hear my voice, we'll go ahead and come back to the group here before we break off into paired discussions in breakout rooms. I did want to, as a reminder, I know that there's been variable experience in terms of how many meetings people have been to. That is just fine. In fact, Aaron, I know it's going to be, you are our newest member. And I am guessing that you are game to jump in, and it'll be a great opportunity to have a great conversation with somebody that's one of your panel member colleagues. So we'll just take that as that opportunity. So it's not a downside if there's different levels of experience with the various meetings. All right, I think we are ready. Janae, how are we doing in terms of readiness to be able to go into breakout rooms?
We are ready to roll.
Any questions before we head out into breakout rooms? Okay, here we go. And we'll send you a reminder in 5 minutes that 5 minutes have elapsed and it's 10 minutes overall.
All right, here we go. They'll be back in 54 seconds.
Great. Is Karen here still? Yes,
Yes.
with Danny.
Yes. Can you see the breakout room?
Yes.
Nice.
Welcome back. I think we should have everybody returning from their breakout rooms. That looks about right. Aha, yes, Chenka and Debebe were in a breakout room together. Excellent. Welcome back, everyone. Do we have everyone back in our main room here?
Looks like we do.
Okay, terrific. Lovely. Well, it's great to see you all back. And we'll now shift into doing a round robin of, and each person can individually, share out their learnings or kind of the key learnings that they discussed, and you can modify based on your discussion. And I'll just go ahead and call on folks and let you know who's on decks. So why don't we start first with Chenka, and then we'll go to Max after Chenka.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I was with DeBebe and we just talked about, really all the potential around biochar, but then coupled with the extreme financial challenges or economic feasibility. And, just talked about how it may be that the low carbon fuel standard is a good incentive mechanism, but it may not be, or it may not be enough. That there needs to be, kind of other incentives or incentive mechanisms to really get biochar kind of off the ground at scale. I also just talked a little bit about how I haven't necessarily seen or maybe been tracking kind of like what happens to our discussions here, and then where it goes in terms of how the like policy or program is influenced, or how it kind of gets translated into real world learnings or practices of some kind. But again, we kind of talked about how like the low carbon fuel standard just may not be the answer to everything. And so there's, in some ways our discussions can help to inform other types of like incentive mechanisms that might be helpful or necessary with these types of practices.
Great, thank you, Chenka. And we'll go with Max next and then Drew afterwards.
Sure. So I was chatting with Jim. I'll let him talk about his own comments. We talked a little bit similar to what Chenka just brought up about kind of when and how the outcomes from this group are communicated, and whether there's any expectation of actual like developing formal recommendations, or is it kind of through this discussion process that sort of the information flows out. We were both a little bit surprised, I think, by the amount of focus on biochar, I think for different reasons. I think for me, everything we talk about, I'm trying to fit it into like a fuel quantification pathway and understand exactly like why we're talking about it and how it ends up in a lower carbon intensity fuel. And so for biochar, we had a good little chat about there's actually maybe several ways it could. And so for me, that's still an area of fuzziness about where that fits. And I think my other thought, we have a lot of topics we touch on are sort of areas of research people are still figuring out. And again, when I bring it back mentally to putting it into a carbon intensity fuel pathway, I wonder if like, is that farther out? Are there things we should be discussing that are scientifically already established and we just need to figure out how they fit in the fuel pathway?
Thanks, Max. All right, we have Drew next, and then we'll go with Danny.
All right. Well, Chris and I were talking, and biochar obviously is one of the topics that came up because it's one of the big ones. So I won't. Everybody else kind of covered the same things we covered as far as biochar goes. Certainly has a lot of promise just in terms of using forest residues, things like that. One of the things that I was talking about were the things we haven't covered yet, like the unintended consequences. Whatever the incentive is, we're incentivizing activity. What is that activity? Where's the unintended consequence? And what does that look like in terms of leakage? Okay, if we convert ag land from food to fuel, well, we still need food. So what does that look like? What's the impact? Versus saying forest residue that maybe isn't being used right now. Maybe there's a win-win there. Health, human health impacts. If we're going to be producing something, in an area that is heavily populated, what are the health impacts, or what are the health impacts to people who are gathering the material or processing it? If it's a novel industry that we're talking about incentivizing, we should understand that. And then best practices. We haven't really gotten into what are if we don't know the specific activity you're talking about, we can't really talk about the best practices around it yet. So just a lot of interesting things that we haven't covered yet. Hopefully we'll get to at some point in time. Anyway, so that was our discussion. Oh, and then kelp. We talked about carbon sequestration, kelp, using that for biofuel and things like that. And I mentioned that if you want to look at carbon sequestration, a good key term is eelgrass. That's off the coast. So those are the topics we're having.
Thanks, Drew. We'll go with Danny next, and then Aaron after that.
I was talking with Karen, who knows a lot about canola, which is really helpful for me. We do at the department, or I've done quite a bit of research in dryland cropping systems to find out what practices are growers using for conservation, what are the motivations, what are the barriers, and I think canola is a really is a missing part of the equation for us. I don't think we well captured information about that. So honestly, a lot of what we were talking about was her just educating me about the rotations and the benefits and the trade-offs, especially where food versus fuel is concerned. And we didn't talk too much about it, but obviously there's a lot of kind of global impacts of shifting to fuel production from food production. So that was very interesting. We also talked a little bit about, I think both of us working a lot with growers are always interested to see how some of this really important discussions gets leveraged for something that's actually of use to the people who are actually on the ground managing the lands that we all talk about. So we were kind of brainstorming what are extension or outreach products that can come from this consortia of very smart and engaged people.
Thanks, Danny. And we'll go with Aaron next, and then Paul after. Should we come back to you, Aaron?
Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry there. Yeah, I was with the MC and we got to know each other, I guess you could say, in the first minutes, but we did talk specifically about project siting and I guess the West Side I-5 corridor wind energy siting and dealing with local jurisdictions and what happens in Olympia versus what gets to counties and the order and the process and the support and sort of the tension, if you will, around what I think, is going on with the signing of a more comprehensive and like 40-some page project siting and permitting bill with agency coordination that I'll be working on with the ecology as well. An interagency siting and permitting advisory council, which will continue the work done the last 2 years on recommendations around low carbon energy siting recommendations to whittle these down from 70 recommendations to, a handful of implementable ones that developers can interact with a little easier. So that's kind of what we were on and didn't really rewind to the last year because I wasn't here. So thank you for having me today. I'll catch up.
Thanks, Aaron. We know you will. And we'll go with Paul next. And then after that, Dr. Chris.
Yeah, Sherry and I talked and just kind of got to know each other a little bit, but pretty quickly we both have an interest in forest residues, slash piles as feedstock. I think we both have a healthy skepticism, I would call it, that we don't want to have a system that burns 100 tons of carbon to capture 50 tons of carbon, in essence. And so how do we do that? And we sort of got in the weeds, I guess, a little bit with size of slash piles and efficiency and what to do with them, and if not, or alternatives and stuff like that. So we kind of talked about that, and we could probably talk for a lot longer about that. That's it.
Thanks, Paul. With Dr. Chris and then John.
Yeah, I express my thanks to all these scientists and people doing this amazing stuff. As a family doctor, it's a new world to me, but just amazing to hear all the stuff that is known and is being looked at, and from all your different fields and worldwide perspective, like Jim talking about what's been looked at in Australia. And I'm just like, wow. Specifically, beyond biochar, what are all those biofuels? What are the health impacts? And then how to monitor the air quality and help especially highly affected communities not be more affected as we shift this. Including the ocean, plants like we talked about, Puget Sound Clean Air Agency in terms of air monitoring and kind of working together. I think they're gearing up to be more active. And just the life cycle assessment that I'm guessing historically has not been a thing for our fossil fuel infrastructure. The whole, we just kind of someone else deals with that or doesn't deal with that, and so we're kind of let's all deal with that because it's all part of the problem and part of the solution now. So really excited to see this, but looking at those health impacts and what are all the different clean fuels and how to implement that along with the carbon sequestration. So thanks.
Thank you. We'll have John next and followed by Sherry.
Yeah, hi there. Had a great discussion with Abby about kind of taking stock of where we've come in the last year and what we focused on, and compare that to what our charter is, what our purpose or deliverables. And I zeroed in on three things. One that's been talked about a lot, which is biochar, which agreed that is immense opportunity, has economic challenges. I rate that as kind of moderately difficult to resolve, but also biochar is kind of, in the end, a pretty small piece of the big puzzle. Really, it's biofuels that this whole thing is about, and we haven't really gotten into that. And I think part of that is that's I rate as very difficult to get that over the finish line. You've got issues with supplanting food. It's huge ecological impact. It's the bottom end of the economic pyramid in terms of production, fuel rates behind humans and animals for value. And also it just has a really low energy return on energy investment, being wet biomass. So, those are big issues that really need to be addressed. And then the third one was, as I reviewed the purpose statement of this group, that there's 6 items listed, of which we've only touched on a little part of the first one. And it's all about, sequestration of forest and ag lands. And that obviously isn't about biofuel. It's in the offset category, but that I rate as the easiest, most scalable, most cost-effective way to move forward. And that's what we're discovering in the carbon work group. So, looking forward, I think we really need to assess what is the total charge for this group, and with the time we have, we've covered some ground really well with biochar. That's top of the list. I mean, top of the effort with the expertise here, but we've got so far to go, and we're kind of not dealing with the really big issues. So that was kind of my take on that, and I'll pass it on.
Thanks, John. We have Sherry next, followed by Jim.
Yeah, I don't, Paul shared about what we talked about, and I don't think I have much to add to all of what you've all said. I guess as Paul's and my conversation went to forest practices, thinking about some of the generational assumptions that, about forest practices that we might be able to have impact on just by maybe challenging some of what we think we have to do because we've always done it, not to diminish the purpose behind some practices. But I guess that's what I would add, that, in our conversation. But other than that, don't have anything further.
Thanks, Sherry. We've got Jim, and then we'll go with Danny.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So as Max indicated, we talked a bit about recommendations and what form they will take and that sort of thing. And we were just sort of scratching our head as to, is this part of what this annual report is about? Is there going to be a more formal recommendation process? So understanding the machinery of the panel itself in terms of how we're going to formulate those recommendations. And then the second thing was trying to draw the link between something like biochar or just carbon sequestration on ag lands that may or forest residues that may or may not have anything directly, it seems, to do with fuel production, transportation fuels. And so trying to understand that, going to be awarding credits, and is it just sort of these are additional credits, just the money you get here will go over here and then you'll sequester carbon over here, regardless of whether it has anything to do with the actual transportation fuel. Trying to understand that, I think. We could draw a few tenuous, I don't know, tenuous, tortuous is the word I think we use, pathways saying, yeah, well, okay, you make biochar from forest residues, you put it on ag land, and then that ag land is used to produce canola oil, which is used to make transportation fuel. And is that the connection, the thread that we follow, or is it, or just in general, we're just looking for a place to sequester carbon in ag and forestry systems, and whatever money we can do to incentivize that is how we will do that. So I think sort of those were the two main issues, sort of understanding what are the recommendations, how will they be formulated, and then the second one being the connection between some of these and transportation fuels. I guess one third point I'd just like to say is that, as I think John just discussed, I went back and I have the advisory panel purpose right in front of me here, and yeah, we've just scratched the surface, and it seems like the scope for this panel is much larger than the ability to address it. I guess is what I'm concerned, that we have 6 different things that we're just getting going into, and we're just working on the first part. And it's the sort of thing where we could meet every 2 weeks for half a day and maybe get through all of this, but obviously that's not going to happen. So I'm just curious how we're going to reconcile that part. It's just have large expectations for what we're going to do, but it's going to be tough to meet those. So.
Thank you, Jim. We'll have Danny next, and then Karen, if you're on the line, we can have Karen next.
Well, is this the same Danny or a different Danny?
I shared out already, I think, on behalf of Karen and I, but Karen would be great.
Oh, I'm sorry.
From you too.
Thank you.
No, that's okay. I don't have much to add. Like Jim just mentioned, we're all on the same page in a lot of regards. Again, Danny and I met each other for a few minutes and just talked a lot about, we have a familiar connection with my background's in soil science, and as is hers. So just a lot about, again, the end products and goals of this group, and making sure there's outreach to different sectors of the public, so everybody's on the same page about all of this. Yeah, I can't add more than what we already have. Everybody else has. Appreciate the opportunity, though.
Thanks, Karen. And now I realize that the tile on my screen moved. So sorry about that, Danny. And we have MC. MC, you have not gone. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. All right. So it was Aaron and I. So I was kind of catching Aaron up a little bit on how we arrived at biochar in particular. And then as he mentioned, we were talking a lot about because he's a rural coordinator and we operate in rural areas as well, about sort of rural acceptance for environmental initiatives and how that's been has a bit of a storied past. And I was just saying I was very grateful that we arrived at biochar, which is something that everybody can participate in. But on a more macro level too, I think I don't know that it's, maybe the purview of the scope of the committee, but as leaders in this space, it's probably something that I think we should think about for ourselves. Like, how do we, with biochar, whatever we're doing, like how do we package this up in a way that's palatable and something that there can be equality and everybody can participate in, and that people will be excited about. So that's just kind of what we were discussing.
Great, thank you, MC. And then Abby and Debebe, did you want to jump in with your what you were thinking about? Maybe start with Abby.
Sure. I think John gave a great recap. And especially in terms of kind of where we are in this panel's process, which is part of the reason we're having the meeting that we are today, is to kind of do that direction check and make sure that we are learning about things in the most effective way possible, and that we're giving the topics the time and depth that they deserve, while also having some forward momentum, and how we might, what's working well and what could potentially be improved. And I also mentioned that I have a very I'm an implementation focused person. And so a lot of what I have been taking away from these discussions is what is working on a small scale and what the barriers are to working at a larger scale, and kind of the scalability of these practices, and what the barriers might be, and how we might be able to use this program or potentially other programs to help address some of those barriers. And something I didn't mention in that discussion was just I think an area where we have some learning still to do is around the impacts and how we can maximize benefits and minimize negative impacts.
Thanks, Abby. Debebe?
Yeah, I was discussing with Chenka, and she and I had overlaps. The level of support for biochar in the initial review was big learning for me, and the quantified GHG reduction from biochar also that important. And I learned also, not only in this team because of the interest here, in Colorado, they are already selling some sort of credit. I'm thinking they must have some mechanism to quantify that, and they must have something to verify that. So that's one area that I learned more. Of course, we need more knowledge also on unintended impacts. Alternative incentive mechanism. Is there a better mechanism than CFS to promote biochar at a scalable level? We need also to learn a little bit more on economics. We had some insights shared in previous presentations, but we may need a little bit more so that we can say, oh, this is not going to help enough to move landowners or biochar, implementation of biochar at a scalable level. So these are the areas that I raised in the meeting with Chenko. But interesting to hear overall feedback, and I'm happy that we are having this session, because we will revise our priorities if we have to revise our priorities. And the other thing I really like from the discussion is, initially, everybody is not with a different background, and we come up, we sense different priorities, different approach. But once we get all this engagement, and then we come up, maybe our level becomes in a similar position, and we may need to choose another direction, or we may need to, Jim raised important things. How do we provide recommendations? How do we use the output of, and I remember yes, MC also said, how do we package what we did in this group to come up with some usable output? So for me, these are really interesting things. I think we have task to do for the next session's deliberation, I believe.
Thank you, Debebe. Is there anyone else that we haven't covered? I don't think so. Well, we're a little bit over on time, so we'll be taking a break shortly. I do want to say that I think it's really great, everything that people were having discussions about and sharing out in roundtable. And I actually think that in terms of how I had envisioned our next session to be focusing on the panel experience, this was actually a nice blend of both. And I can see, just based on what everyone was sharing in the round robin, that it's timely to come back at this point and really figure out how we want to tweak, what we need to clarify, and have that course adaptation to where we need to be. So I think that's what we can pick up with after we take a 15-minute break, is coming back and digging a little bit further into some of the issues and questions people raised, because and we can figure out what is next for the panel and how we can adapt our course for that, so that we can provide the best, have the best use of your time, and then also have the kind of input and recommendations that are most useful for the Clean Fuel Standard and others, perhaps. So, other questions or comments before we take a 15-minute break? That would put us at 5 till the hour, in whichever time zone you find yourself. We'll go ahead and we'll take a 15-minute break. Thank you, everyone, and see you in 15 minutes at 5 till. All right, everyone, if you can hear my voice, we're going to start to reassemble after our break. Okay. Hopefully folks were able to maybe go outside, enjoy some of the spring. We will go ahead and get started again, if you can hear my voice.
Yeah.
All right, how are folks doing? Do we have any refills on the coffee or maybe water? Yep, there we got a refill. I got a refill myself. Oh yes, you're prepared at any time. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And if folks are able to come on screen, that would be great. Or just let us know if you're there, but not able to come on screen at the time being. Okay, so to do a time check, we have about an hour left. And the focus again is to take a point in time after we've had this almost year as an advisory panel to reflect back on where we're at, where we've come from, and then start to tee up where we want to go. And what was really great is that in the last session, people were sharing a bit of a look back, but also thinking about where do we need to go. And
so actually we've done a little bit of a change up on our agenda where we're essentially going to shift the next discussion from being about where, what's been the experience of the panel and maybe what are some areas that we need to address, and going right into what's next. Because essentially we had a combined conversation this last time about both things like biochar learnings, as well as thinking back about, what do we need to know about the charter? What kind of recommendations are we talking about as a panel in the future? How do we select practices to focus on? So I think the questions that were raised were really great. And I'll say that they are the kinds of questions that we've been thinking about within the ecology team. We've been, if you've had a chance to look at the charter, it's interesting to come back to something that was developed at a point in time and thinking about, do we need to change this? How do we, and I would say, for instance, in this case, it is a working document, and that something that we've thought within ecology, for instance, is that might be something that we want to do as a panel, is to have a regular rhythm of checking in on some of these foundational documents, and also to think about the purpose, again, of the panel. So this is very timely. And I thought what we could do is we'll repurpose our next breakout discussion and round robin discussion, really get around what are recommendations that the panel has for what we want to do next. And so, as an example, thinking about the charter, it could be recommend that we update the charter, review and update the charter. That's just an example. I thought it might be helpful before we jump into that to actually share some of the questions that ecology has about the panel as something concrete to provide feedback on, or perhaps recommendations when we're in the breakout groups. And I will say I could, in some cases, with some of the questions and learnings and reflections people have had, I could flip them into recommendations. So some of it may be, you may not change your thinking on, what you'd like to see us do next, but we're going to frame it that way in what's next for the panel to focus on. Before I share some of the questions that ecology has and kind of our thinking about what might be next, are there comments or questions that you all have, or something we should factor in before making a change in the agenda that I've laid out there? Okay. All right, so if you can go to the next slide, Janae, I can share a bit about the questions that ecology has, and a little bit about how we're thinking about this. And I will say that there's definite opportunity for further conversation about this with the surveys and the one-on-ones. And so this is, I just want to offer that up as opportunity if there's something that doesn't come up today as we're discussing these. This will look familiar. This is the same slide, except now instead of focusing on what is done, for ecology, some of the questions we've been thinking about are, what do we need to do if we were to round out learnings about a practice, in this case, biochar? And I think it was, Paul, you mentioned some of the questions a number of people did about, we need to understand some of the unintended consequences or some of the negative impacts around this particular practice, and also better understand some of the economics. So those are two areas that if we were to round out, having a understanding around a practice, that we would see wanting to complete that. And then we've talked a little bit, and some of you raised, how do we choose biochar? And with biochar, as we've learned more, it does raise questions. How is it connected to the clean fuel standard? And what kind of recommendations or input might there be? And so one thing I'll say, just as a clarification, I would say that the year in review document is not intended to be, making a recommendation on a practice, but really more, here's you could say an arbitrary period of time, a year, say kind of here's what the panel has been up to. So that's the focus of a year in review document from our perspective. And but at some point it would be good to, for instance, to document biochar learning so that, again, as a panel, we can think about this in the future or review it, and then also extend it beyond this group, and to some, to some extent, the way that Karen and Danny were talking about how to be able to share what's been learned here within this group. And I can say I have some ideas on this. So I could see there being a process of, a summary written, and then there being essentially a back and forth with how people in the panel are, what are the reflections and capturing the different perspectives in the panel on a draft summary of learning, so that we can show the complexity of the different perspectives that people are bringing to the panel. So it's not, that's one way of thinking about documenting learnings. And then I'll say, within our group, we have questions about really where is the point that the panel's input and recommendations have an intersection point with the clean fuel standard. And we do know, for instance, that there's some in 2024, there might be some milestones that might be of interest to, or might be a good connection point, but we still don't know enough about that. And one of the things a year ago is we knew even less about that. So this has been, I think that if you look at there were questions back in the initial convening around really what are we talking about in terms of mechanisms, and we're learning that. So ecology needs to do some work to further define, like, what are those decisions and where might there be those intersections. And then I think from that, it would be an easier question to answer for the panel on, like, what kind of recommendations and what sort of format makes the most sense. So that's just to share. I would say all of this can be adapted, and especially with your input and what you need to be successful. I think also ecology needs to further define where are those meeting points and what are the needs. And so that's just some thinking there. Questions on that? I will just throw out that I have been looking into other ways that especially expert panels provide recommendations and show the complexity. Like, it's not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily hold it to that there's unanimous agreement, for instance, of the panel on a recommendation, but to show the richness of perspectives. So that's, I have more I can talk about, but it won't. Just have some ideas on how we might be doing documentation and making recommendations, and I'll just stop there.
Rebecca, I do have a question.
Yes, please.
It's a little off point, but I'll just bring it up because I was reflecting on it today. For the composition of this panel, as you were saying, assembling the complexity, which is the different facets of perspectives, which is, I guess, what we bring. We don't have tribal representation. Is that, I imagine you tried, but having just in this last year attended a tribal, the ATNI climate conference, they're doing a lot.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the representation. I don't have information in here, but related to membership, we do have Amy Trainer, who is a representative of the Swinomish tribal community. She's not attending today, and so at any rate, that we do have that connection. And we were also interested in more connections, and this is where we are right now. But over time that may change. I do know that. Oh yeah, please.
I can add a little bit there that we did have more conversations with members of different tribal nations, and one of the challenges is that they are asked to serve on a lot of advisory panels. And so there were interested parties who were just overbooked, to be honest. But this is an area where we are continually open to participation. We also sent out, when the advisory panel started, we sent out a notice to every tribal nation in the state, letting them know about the opportunity to participate. And, you know, the membership of this panel has already changed and will continue to change over time. And so I think there's always areas where we are looking for and you know, seeking different perspectives. So that's certainly an area of improvement and something where we could you know, continue to improve and bring in other perspectives.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of figured that, and
and thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah.
This similarly, we've been actively pursuing a representative from an environmental justice group for the entire length of this panel. And once again, you know, it's a great problem to have that there's so much conversation happening around environmental justice in the state right now. But unfortunately, that means the experts in that field are also overburdened with requests to participate on panels and councils. So we are still looking for someone who is willing to participate in the panel and has the time to give.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks.
I'll also say I love what Karen and Danny were talking about, and I think it complements very nicely is essentially how to take the work of this group and share it beyond this group, and both enabling panel members to be able to have further conversations, and also ecology or other agency representatives to have conversations. And so I think, for instance, in the case of this year in review, I'm seeing that as an opportunity within the ecology team to connect with some folks who aren't on the panel, but who maybe we talked to, you know, it might have been some representatives from tribal nations or other communities that we want to just make them aware of what's been happening with the panel. Thank you, Sherry, for raising that, and Abby, for giving us some more information about membership. I'm going to say, if we could go to the next slide. And here I'm going to say, PowerPoint apparently does not align with the way I think. What I would like you to visualize here is, if you're looking into the distance and you can see way off in the distance, within ecology, we've been having conversations around when are we thinking that there could possibly be a point, again, of intersection between, you know, what the panel is working on and the clean fuel standard. And I guess I would say the takeaway here is, if you're squinting into the far distance, you can see like the second half of 2024, we're going to start having some milestones that may be of relevance, but we're still sorting that out. So I want to say the caveat there is, we do have a milestone in October around tier 2 pathways, which for those of you, that may be more meaningful for some of you than others. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only time that there's an intersection. So I want to make sure to underscore that there could be other intersections, but in terms of kind of having a sense for when we are envisioning, it could be helpful to have a formal recommendation from the panel, and maybe it's more than one recommendation. That's, I think, for us to determine. It might be, again, in that second half of 2024. So I'll just flag that here. Those, again, on the slideways, if you tilt your head, it's the same items from the previous slide. And what I would see us doing in these breakout groups is really thinking about your reaction to those items that you know, having continuing on with economics and unintended consequences with biochar specifically, and then documenting those, and that involves figuring out what does it mean to document something and for what audience and purpose. Also ecology, doing that internal work of figuring out where there are opportunities that we know of at this point, just further, you know, focusing what the opportunity is, which then makes it possible for the panel to really see what are the possibilities around input and recommendations and make a decision about what the panel is interested in. and what you maybe need to do or need in support or particular foundations, to actually accomplish being able to get to a point of a recommendation. Comments, questions on that? Very conceptual. And I wish it was closer to what I imagined in my mind's eye. One thing I'll say, and again, I would say the type of input and recommendation, this, just to clarify, is really something that this panel can decide what is recommended in the structure. So at least in statute, there's not a specific way that there will be a recommendation to ecology or input to ecology. That's something that is for us to decide here. I could see it's possible for some type of annual rhythm on the recommendation, if that is what the panel thinks would be most useful, to be on an annual basis. So it may be that there's a decision gate at a certain point on an annual basis of, is there a recommendation to make? Yes, no. If yes, then proceed. If no, then what do we do at that point? I will say these are all musings and thinkings that are absolutely open to influence.
I do like the idea of some sort of feedback cycle where, if we're going down a certain topic, and there's a point where the answer is no, not interested in that topic. Okay, great, we'll move on to something else.
Yeah, that's great. That's one thing we've been thinking about, is how to, this kind of gets into what are the procedures of the group, and which of course need to tie into the charter. So that's important. It has to come from there. I could see one of the ways I like to think about it is decision gates. So like you were saying, Max, there may be regular rhythms of when we decide, are we pursuing something further? So if it's a practice, for instance, at least one way I have been thinking about it is maybe we might have like a basic, let's say in a learning process here, we maybe have a presentation on the basics of the practice, and we might decide then, we're just going to keep it here, or are we going to go, do we want to learn about LCA in depth and economics and negative unintended consequences? That's a very drafty draft example, but I like the idea of being able to knowing when there's going to be decision opportunities, and to go from there. Sherry.
Maybe you said this, but what if we had a suite of topics and we spent time as a group identifying the top 3 priority topics for even doing what you suggest, which I like, which is an introduction and then a decision point of going more deep.
Yeah, I think that is a definite possibility. And like, what could you just maybe make an example of a possible suite?
Well,
very drafty draft.
Yeah, sure. So biochar is an example of an area of application, forestry sort of applied work, and we could have other things in that category. Your point about unintended consequences, I know you and I talked a little bit about green energy placement, not exactly directly carbon related. However, it has implications about food production and maybe unintended consequences of interrupting natural climate solutions. So there's sort of an area of things that we're doing that may be barriers to or impediments to carbon work or other types of things. I think you just made the point about economy, maybe economies of scale, I think is another one, meaning I'm sort of brainstorming.
Yes, yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
That gives us, I think if we put our head, it would be fun actually maybe to brainstorm together, but then we would have maybe categories, because you don't want to just a bunch of things, but categories that we could look at and assess and say, we agree, we'd like to go deeper. on these things or these categories. Just a thought.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that
I
would
think I
narrow
understand what you're saying.
because
Yes.
the universe is big on this subject. And we might also have some criteria about why. In other words, we'd like to know more about this because we could see making a recommendation. I mean, there's things we learn about, interesting, but then there's things that we learn about that we could see maybe parlaying into recommendations.
Thanks, Jerry. And this makes me think a little bit about Chenka. You had raised, I think, about one of the things that at least I was thinking about when you had shared your conversation. I was thinking there may be many recommendations that are not, once we get further, we'll be able to determine, oh, that's not actually in the scope of the clean fuel standard. So what do we do with those other recommendations? Are there opportunities for those to be shared in some way? So that's a question that we've been discussing, is what happens with recommendations. And it might just be maybe coming back to some of what Max and Jim were, I think, alluding to, or at least I was taking away, was really what's the connection with biochar and the CFS, and is it torturous? And we've been talking about, it might be helpful to have some scenarios to at least illustrate the kinds of things that we think might be connected, so that that would just be helpful for illustrative and understanding purposes. But then also, it may be that we're learning through the study of biochar that one of our learnings will be, actually, it is torturous, and here's how we can better select future practices for the panel to focus on. So I think that's one of the questions that I have is through this learning process about biochar, what are we going to be able to, how can we further refine how we go forward with the next practices that we might dig into? All right, so many thoughts there. I think it might, yes.
I had a really quick comment. So biochar can be torturous, but it also can be a byproduct of pyrolysis, where you get bio oil, you get syngas out of, both of which could be refined into transportation fuels. So it can also be directly part of the life cycle analysis, right? So it doesn't have to be like completely separated. You lose some biochar if you're focusing on producing syngas. So there's a trade-off, but it can be part of the process, you know. And then we were talking, this happened a long time ago when we were talking about the scope of the panel. And, you know, I was trying to put boundaries on it in terms of, what are we talking about when we're talking about, you know, clean fuel standards? What does it encompass? And we talked about the life cycle analysis being, you know, the entire life cycle. And as soon as that becomes part of it, if you're growing canola and you're producing oil and you use the waste material to create biochar, and then you take that biochar and you put it back in the soil, it increases the productivity of the site. It's all part of it. You've got to account for it, because the life cycle analysis is going to pick up on that reduction in carbon emissions. And so relative to diesel or gasoline, that fuel source is going to look a lot better. So that was what I recall was why we started heading down the road to biochar. So that's just a clarification point. There is a direct tie-in to biochar and what we're talking about. It's probably not clear, but Jim would obviously be the one who's the expert in that. I just wanted to bring us back to that.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. And I should say, I don't want to suggest that we shouldn't be talking about biochar. And actually, I think what you laid out is what the scenario that I have in mind, as illustrative and good for discussion and to understand the different elements of that. So I think that's, I absolutely, and that is how we got to biochar, and that there was interest in seeing relevance around it. And Jim.
Yeah, so I guess it's a point of what part of the biochar universe is applicable. That's the real thing. You can make biochar that has nothing to do with transportation fuels, depending on how you use it, or you can direct it to, as Drew just outlined, the sorts of things you can do which have direct application. And so we have to define, if that's the case, we just need to pick out what part of the universe we're going to consider part of what this panel addresses. But that's the trouble with biochar. It's this all-inclusive term that means so much, but it's just so many different ways to implement it. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And I think that's been one of the, it's been really useful to learn more about the practice. And for some people, there may already be understandings about where to focus, but for the whole panel to have a better understanding, I think that's been really helpful. So I know we're at 23 after, and there's really great, this has been really good to hear the thinking that what's coming to mind for folks. I'd like to do that in a breakout structure. And I'm wondering, it seems like we'll maybe do a abbreviated individual reflection. Maybe just to have a moment to think your thoughts and be able to then jump into a paired discussion. So we'll maybe do a minute and a half of individual reflection. And here, if the place to focus your thinking, and then discussion in a pair. And then when we come back in a round robin, we've talked about many things, and in both the first breakout discussion and round robin, and then just now, what would you recommend, or what would you like to see the panel to focus on, and when? So there's been some things that have been mentioned. So if there's something that you think is nearer and more urgent, to note that. And if you see something that needs to be done, but maybe is a little bit further in the hazy future, to flag that as well. And then we'll come back and do a round robin. And I think this is going to be really helpful for us, especially when we go into having one-on-one check-ins over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then also in this survey, I think it's going to get us a great start on both those things, which will then even further advance our planning. Okay, Janae, you're on standby, and we'll go. We don't need to break out quite yet, but we'll do 90 seconds of individual reflection on what you'd like to see the panel explore and when in the next, let's say 1 to 2-ish, let's say 12 to 18 months. And you can go ahead and stop video. So we'll do 90 seconds beginning now. Okay, if you can hear my voice, we'll go ahead and come back. And I will say, as you're coming back, I want to draw your attention to, we made a mid-course adaptation to the slide you see there, because it was previously designed for talking about another question. And I need my video. It was previously designed for another purpose. And so really, again, the focus is on what you'd like the panel to explore and when. So if you see something about experiences, that's from the previous purpose. So again, the question at hand is that one that's right there above the table. So we'll go ahead and go into, again, randomly generated pairs. And this will be for, if there's some insight, do you folks want to have 10 minutes or less time and more time in plenary? Maybe a little bit less time in the pairs, or okay, a little bit less time in the pairs. Okay, we'll maybe do 8 minutes. All right, thanks, and we'll see you in 8 minutes. Janae, work your magic. Welcome back, everyone. I think we have everybody here. Okay. Well, it is just a time check, 38 after, and we can really spend the next 20 minutes on a round robin here. And I'll just say, in terms of we can spend the remaining of the time just having a chance to discuss the discussions that you all had. We could go ahead and I can, shall we go in pairs this time? Okay. Wonderful. So I don't necessarily have the pairs, but I can start first by, I see Paul here. How about you and your partner?
So Karen and I were talking, and we fairly agreed that some way to narrow our focus in the coming months, as she mentioned, the SWOT analysis. For those who don't know what that is, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That is a tool or device to use. Sherry spoke to that as well. Some way to categorize what it is that we think we can focus on, and then just to add my own flavor to it. I've been thinking about, okay, what are the deliverables and when is that? And I'm getting to understand that we have fair latitude to decide what those recommendations are. But right now I feel a little overwhelmed with just the scope of what all, and we have sort of narrowed down to biochar. There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm about that, but it's also a big world out there, and there's other things. Some way to narrow down our focus, and maybe have the next meeting or two do that, just to use Karen's SWOT analysis. Let's do a SWOT analysis and see what comes out as or rises to the top of that analysis, so that we can focus on that, because being so diffuse is can be just overwhelming. And so, and then we can start getting down to brass tacks and recommendations, solid recommendations. You have anything
Thanks,
to add
Paul.
to that, Karen?
The only thing was, I don't know when and where this could possibly be a one meeting in person thing. I mean, here's all this. This is great. I mean, because we're obviously a geographic spread, and there's cost and there's time and all that. But if that would be somewhere in the future, I'd just make a mental note of that for a possibility, and see how many people might be interested in meeting in the middle. Yakima, Moses, something. So I'm not exactly in the middle no matter what, but I don't know. That's all I have.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate you saying that. It's something that we've been thinking about at Ecology too. So it's helpful to know that might be of interest. Well, thanks, Paul and Karen. Let's see how about Danny? Who is your partner? You and your partner.
I talked with Drew. We're both sort of soil carbon inventory nerds, so I'm not going to lie, we maybe got sidetracked talking about inventory. However, I work with the United States Climate Alliance Washington group. There's many folks represented from various agencies, and we are thinking a lot about how to integrate natural and working lands into the statewide inventory. So even though it was a sidetrack, it did have some actionable elements. I think it's nice to find out who's doing what, so that we're not duplicating efforts, and also can leverage each other's work to achieve some of these goals. So I think at the very end, we quickly said, yes, categorization of topics would be helpful. So echoing some of other people's comments and adding something about inventories to the list.
Thanks, Danny. Was there anything, Drew, you wanted to add to that?
No, that was pretty much the coverage. Sure. I did my best to try to keep it short. It was very difficult for me.
One thing what you just mentioned reminded me that there's an important interest for ecology in the panel is the utility and connections between panel members, and that has not been really coming to the fore as much recently, but I think it's great to hear you connecting in the breakout room. So that's encouraged. And then also I'll say just a favorite part of for me of today was really the round robin at the beginning. So happy to see those connections happening and thinking about ways we can help support that further. Okay, how about Jim and you and your partner?
Yeah, so my partner is Kabebe, and we agreed pretty much with the need to triage and somehow focus on the machinery of getting to what it is we really want to do. Mentioned that it was important to do something well, or not at all, but decide what depth we're going to approach something. We both expressed the desire to finish the biochar, work it through the process, whatever process we're going to develop. And then we also, at the very end, in the last minute, actually, I mentioned that I gave a talk a couple of months ago called Why Bioenergy Needs Biochar and Vice Versa. And basically getting to the point that the real strong connection is that to the extent that biochar stimulates soil organic matter formation in soils, it allows you to take greater harvest of residues from that land to use for bioenergy and make transportation fuels. And that's a key thing that we need more work on to sort out, but it's something that really can make a difference in the long term. And so that's a direct connection where as long as you're putting biochar on any land that's related to growing stuff for transportation fuels, you're in good shape as far as this advisory panel. I don't know if Debbie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, everything is well said here. This will be also the only thing I will add is probably his talk on bioenergy and biochar relationship will also help us in relating it to CFS to see that part clearly.
Yeah, thank you, Jim and Debebe, and that's that will be good to take a look at. Okay, let's see. I think, how about Max, you and your partner?
Yes, my partner was Sherry. So we had both had some, I think, different interests in what's next. I think we're both interested in establishing and understanding the kind of feedback process with what are the state's priorities. Does that align with this panel's members' priorities? Are there things that are off the table? Are there things that the state hasn't been thinking about? So getting that communication. I think personally, it'd be helpful to have a session about like the technical aspects of how these ideas go into the clean fuel standard, how the pathways work, how should we be thinking about these activities as we talk about them. I think that'll help focus our discussions, and then excited to get into agricultural management discussions and how that can fit in. Sherry?
Yeah, agree with that. And then so personally, I like that, just generating ideas even with two people. I feel like there's a lot to it, and I agree very much with Max that we want to be directed. Like if we come up with ideas and you say that's a conversation killer with the state, then that's good to know. I personally would like to see us looking at the production of alternative energy and the maybe unintended consequences or the cost benefits analyses of those alternative energies like solar and other things in our efforts to reduce fuel. We don't want to look back and say, oops, we shouldn't have done it that, because and then the scale. I'm interested in us exploring the scale of things that we do, and the benefits of economy of scale, but also the costs of doing things large when we could do a lot small. But I agree with everyone that sorting it out because you said when, in the near term, so that we can develop a path.
Thank you, Sherry and Max. Let's see, we have who is still to go? Chenka, and your partner?
Yeah, so I was with MC. We talked about we like the biochar discussions. We think it's valuable. I also just talked about, regardless of what the sort of particular like tool or innovation or subject matter is, I'd really like, I think it would be a good use of this group to really dive into like the trade-offs for each of those things, because I think that is where some recommendations might be really valuable. So whether it's like canola or whether it's biochar or whether it's, improved forest management practices or whatever, I think we've got a good group here of folks who can dive into what the trade-offs are of like recommending one thing versus another, or like one practice change for, producing canola versus another, whatever the case may be. So that was kind of what I was thinking, but MC, I know we talked about a few other things.
We sure did. But yeah, thank you, Chenka. I think that was a really good summary. I think one of the things we talked about was sort of purpose and scope of the committee, and what is it our role to be like a technology clearinghouse for some of these things? Like, for instance, I would love to know if it's feasible to do lignocellulosic biofuel generation from forest slash. And there's people making it in the garage and they come to us, but can we be kind of a clearinghouse and put heads together on that type of technological discussion?
Thank you, Chenka and MC. Let's see, how about John, you and your partner?
Yeah, folks have covered a lot of what we discussed already, and it's about trying to fit into this narrow time and commitment we have to get the biggest bang for our buck. And relative to the biochar, I think we spent a good amount of time on that, and it'd be great for the ecology team to kind of wrap that up so we can move on. As I mentioned in the previous breakout, the whole alternative fuels, biofuels, especially as it relates to Washington State, what's available. We've heard canola, we've heard forest residues. Both of those have precursors in other states that we can learn from, but we need to really have that discussion, I think, in the short term. That's the whole point of clean fuel alternatives there, and what's really scalable, the pros and cons. And then also at the same time, within the next 18 months, is to go down that list of 6 things relative to sequestration, improve forest management, at least find out what we need to find out. We may not be able to do a deep dive like we did with biochar, but to get those questions raised and reported. And it would also personally, in relative to the carbon work group that's ongoing right now, it would be really excellent to have the input from this group of expertise to get any input from as many different people as possible. There's a great deal of overlap with those 6 purpose statements there with what we're doing in the carbon work group. And I would, I don't want to hijack what's going on here, but if there's an opportunity to get a double bang for our buck here, that would be great. So
thanks, John. And who was your partner?
Dr. Chris, if he's got some.
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Chris.
I just want to say to get our job done, if I don't think 2-month intervals is set in stone. So if it takes a meeting monthly, if that's feasible for folks, I think that would be something to consider. I think that was my only addition.
Thank you. Let's see, Abby? Or Abby may have needed to step away.
Yeah, she had to step away for just a moment.
All right, who was her partner?
It was me, Aaron.
Okay, Aaron.
We talked about a little bit the mechanics of the clean fuel standard, and like I asked about canola specifically being added as a, I guess that's what it was said, as added. Given it's a rotational crop in Washington, and it's gone, from 10,000 acres in 2011 to 120,000 acres in 2021. So 2 million acres across the United States of this. So how that gets added and such into the list, and just a general background of CFS. So that's what we did. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Right. Was there any other breakout group? I think those were our breakout groups. Thank you very much for sharing those conversations here with the group. And I think that will be helpful, certainly for ecology, in bringing all these pieces together and helping to shape what happens next. And again, I think it is helpful to have guideposts. What is going to be, what is the scope of influence on the clean fuel standard, and how can the panel best provide input and recommendations? I think that's our goal to get there. So you provided us really great input to be able to reflect on that and then share back and have some draft ideas on how that might look in the next 12 to 18 months. So stay tuned, certainly. And I guess one thing I'll say that by way of wrap up, I'll say that there are different kinds of panels and committees. And this is probably one of, I think, the more challenging types of committees or panels, in that we are really forming the purpose of the panel in real time. So oftentimes, for instance, the host agency might know more about what are the sideboards on what really they need, and might know more about the types of recommendations in concrete forms that would be helpful. So I want to, I guess, share appreciation to you all in this process, because it can feel very frustrating at times to almost like, I think of it as, can I see, what am I seeing? Is it focused yet? Or is it still kind of a hazy shape? And that there's a lot of that in this type of process and so I think we have fortunately had great learnings this past year that can inform what happens next. And that's what I see as the only way forward when you're not really sure where you're going, is to try taking some steps, figure out where you are, and then make your plans based on, where you find yourself. So appreciation to you all for being involved in this process that is, again, can feel overwhelming as we work to refine the focus of the purpose of this panel, and then also our roles in it. So thank you. And some folks are needing to jump off. Thank you so much. And also, Janae, if you want to just pop us out of the screen share view as we wrap up. So yes, I just wanted to thank you all for that. And I, again, am hoping as an aspiration for this panel, we do want to make those opportunities for people to learn about the work of each other. And just the round robin at the beginning on updates was really illustrative of how there's so much going on that we're all doing, and it is of interest to this panel. And so I would encourage you to continue following up with each other on those points of interest with each other, and we'll look to have that be more of a feature of our upcoming work. And as a very practical next step, you can look for an email, and that'll probably be next week, with further information on what how the survey is going to work, and then also scheduling check-ins in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I think this will be, I will say, from where I'm coming from, there's definitely things that I want to have an opportunity to talk further with you each about in what you shared out today. So I appreciate that very much. Other questions, thoughts, matters of business before we adjourn for today? All right. Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed having opportunity to have a little bit more discussion today, and stay tuned. Look forward to the path ahead with you all, and it's great to be working together on this. So thanks so much, and have a good day.